So you got 2/3 of the Not So Grand Jury. You got Derek and Jeff here.
Hello.
To give you a relatively brief sidebar today. So first off, as we have been doing recently, we're going to announce next week's episode, which is Wake Up Dead Man, the third Knives Out installment. This was an interesting one for us, partially because as of currently, and when you're listening to this, if you listen to it on the day it comes out, it's still not on Netflix. It is only in the theater. So for the first time in the history of the very long and illustrious history of the Not So Grand Jury, the three of us watched it all in the theater. Jeff and Mike watched it, a few days before we recorded?
Yeah. I think the day before Thanksgiving.
Day before Thanksgiving, and then I watched it the morning of our recording, which may or may not have given me some recency bias when it came to some of our scores, but nevertheless, it was interesting because for the first time, we really didn't have the benefit of doing research from other people.
Yeah.
Like, we're just basing this on a one-time watch. And certainly there were parts that we, I think, discuss, and where if we had watched it on Netflix, I think we would have paused it and spent some significant time discussing or at least looking at it in order for us to understand what the heck was going on.
Yeah.
Without that benefit, because apparently you're not allowed to just pause real life in the middle of a theater, we sort of winged it with what we had. And it was still a great conversation. We had a lot of fun, but we highly recommend you watch Wake Up Dead Man, which is now will be streaming exclusively on Netflix starting tomorrow, December 12th. And if you can watch it before we release our episode next Thursday, I have a feeling you will be in for a fun conversation with us. So that's the first one. Second, as we typically do with our guests, sometimes when we have a guest host on, we talk a lot, and it's longer than maybe the listeners want to hear. So we tend to pull out sidebars. We did it with Andrea when we did Shawshank Redemption. We did it with Wes, although we didn't really pull anything out with Wes. We just got him back on to discuss commentary.
The schedules happened to line up there.
Correct. And with Will, the same thing happened. We had such a good time with Will on our episode discussing Spy Game that we do have extra commentary. This time we took out a decently long clip that involved discussions of non-disclosure agreements, also known as NDAs, SCIFs, which is short for Sensitive Compartmented Information Facilities, and then also discussion on security clearances. This all stems from the sort of end of Spy Game where Muir is asked to sign an NDA, and he basically says, I've signed hundreds or thousands of them, whatever he says. And that leads me to ask Will, does this happen all the time? And apparently the answer is yes. And we will find out in the clip. But what's interesting is I pulled it out mostly because I think it was sort of stood on its own and it's a good sidebar. I also had pulled it out thinking that we had discussed NDAs before, since I review them or draft them weekly, if not daily, sometimes as part of my job. And I'm realizing, unless you can correct me, Jeff, we really never have.
I don't think we have, no.
No. And if we did, it must have been in passing. So the good thing is I pulled that out because I think during our episode, I kind of assumed, no, we've talked about it. How have we not talked about this before?
Sure.
Well, apparently we haven't. So I'm going to take the opportunity now to actually introduce them, hopefully a little better before we jump into the clip. So a non-disclosure agreement, which is commonly referred to as an NDA, is basically a contract that protects confidential information or proprietary information that's shared between parties. Really, the core purpose of it is to create an obligation to maintain the secrecy of sensitive information for a defined purpose. And that purpose can be evaluating a potential merger or acquisition, discussing a potential collaboration, or sometimes allowing an employee or contractor to perform their role. And normally it takes two different forms. There's the unilateral form where it's one party disclosing to the other party something sensitive and that other party has to keep it confidential. And then sometimes it's mutual where both parties may be exchanging sensitive information and agree to protect each other's information. And usually these agreements identify what is actually confidential. Is it business plans, financials, customer data, trade secrets, proprietary methods, all of the above, and also what is not included, which is publicly available information that the parties can develop on their own, so on and so forth. And so in the spy game episode, when Muir goes into what I believe, and honestly, it's a little unclear because Muir keeps leaving. It seems like he's going into a SCIF. Like, it is basically that is a highly confidential room. It may not be set up as such. Like, technically, every time he would go in, he'd have to be reread back into the SCIF and read out of the SCIF. He just leaves and comes and goes as he pleases.
I have a sense, and this is not my area of expertise in any way, that room where like their entire conversation is being recorded because it could be, needed in an upcoming congressional hearing or something like that. I'm going to wager that a proper SCIF does not have recording equipment in it.
Fair enough. Yeah.
I could be wrong.
Well, I do know that SCIFs, have to have a certain level of top secret, aspects to it. And granted, I do know that there were times where they went off the record and things like that. So, but regardless, this all stems from the fact that, Muir has been having these sort of top secret or at least very secretive conversations regarding Bishop and Hadley and other things, and then gets an NDA handed to him at the end, which presumably means all of the information we just discussed has to remain secretive. And Will explains what that means when it happened to him when he was working in military intelligence. In fact, I think it's happened to him more recently as well, and just sort of how that process works. So, is this a super secret NDA? More than the typical CIA agent NDA? Is this it's always funny. It's like occasionally I'll have a client that be like, this has to go beyond the typical attorney-client privilege. And it's like, there's not levels. It's either protected or it's not, or it's like it's an NDA or it's not. What the hell? Okay, so two things. One, obviously this is very secretive. Obviously, he is now technically after his last day. That was what originally I thought was a reason why they would want him to sign it. Then he says the phrase, I've signed him however many times. Like he implies that this is something he's signed tons of times. Is this just them being dicks and just like scaring them into not, or is this an actual thing that happens in these meetings?
You done here?
Non-disclosure agreement.
Aren't you gonna read it? Read it 1,000 times.
Aiken, would you escort Mr. Muir from the building?
Okay.
Will?
With regard to classified information, there are different levels. There are different rules that attach to those. So, for example, secret information has a specific amount of time that you're not allowed to divulge it. It's got information on how long you have to hold that secret, the penalties that you'll face if you do divulge it. Top secret, significantly longer, significantly higher penalties. And then there are things that are above top secret that are broken out and compartmented. Those can be broad systems, they can be specific programs, they can be specific missions. When you get, it's called being read on to a specific thing. At the beginning, when I received my clearance, I was read on to having a secret clearance. When I was granted access to my first SCIF or secret compartmented information facility, I was read on to the rules of that SCIF, right? And so that was a specific other NDA. When you no longer have a need to know, no longer have access to that, you sign another one that ends your access and lets you know the pieces that you are responsible for, a reminder that you are no longer, that you are still responsible for that, right? So he's been read on and off of lots of missions, lots of programs, lots of different facilities. He's been read off of them. This is him being read off of this particular conversation.
So shouldn't he have been read in then?
Probably.
So normally how this would work, the first meeting he had with that group of folks, he would have signed something at that moment.
Not always, not necessarily.
And it seemed like at the beginning Harker was trying to avoid him knowing anything about why. He was just like, hey, I need your files on Bishop.
Taking a little bit of a step back, early in the movie, they're ransacking Robert Redford's office. Presumably, Robert Redford is pretty high up, probably had access to a decent amount of classified information, some of which is now littered around his place because people were ransacking it. Presumably, everyone that is searching his place has to have that same level of clearance.
And
at least.
There's other problems with that. For example, you should not have any, even within a SCIF, even within one of these controlled areas, nothing should ever be left without a cover sheet. If you walk away, you should always put it back in a safe. So these guys, assuming that his office is inside of a SCIF, and assuming that, it has all of those protections, the people who came through, ransacked it, and left it all out have caused a massive violation, because all of that information, all of the declassification information and everything is all attached to that document. If it gets messed up, thrown across the room, then you no longer have the rules for that document attached to it. And it's not covered so that if somebody walks in, they know, just from the front cover sheet, whether it's secret or classified or sensitive but unclassified, whether it's top secret, what caveats it might have.
That's interesting. I never knew it about the cover sheets.
The other thing the burn bags are real. So, and that's what a burn bag looks like. It's that weird stripy thing. There's not nearly as much burning, as much as shredding. Also, there are rules for when things have to be, if you have printed them out, how long you can have them before they go in a burn bag. And given the amount of paper, Robert Redford had not been following the rules on disposing of his classified in appropriate ways, especially not on his last day.
Especially since he seemed so eager to use a burn bag.
Finally get to use one of these burn bags. Hold this till you hear otherwise. You didn't see what I put in there.
We feeling a little paranoid on our last day?
Not to make an excuse for him, it is 91.
So presumably using one of those is a fairly routine part of his job. I'm surprised that he's implying he never got to use one then.
Yeah. Is there any chance it was different in 91? Or
you would have been working with a lot more paper documents, and the copying and things, the digitization, I think, probably lagged. But I couldn't say. I did.
Okay.
I didn't work for the CIA in 1991. I don't know what the rules were. I do know what they are now because I have to take classes on. I've had to take classes on the cover sheets and the classification rules and all of that.
Sure.
So,
I mean, I can tell you, I worked at a large law firm from 2009 to 2014, and for the last week before I left, I think I put at least 5 full boxes down to the shredding room to be shredded. Now, I assume with Muir, the day when he was leaving at the cozy 3:30 p.m. on his last day, which, by the way, that is how you end your last day. That is completely fair. I got to assume that there's a directive that the next thing that happens is someone goes into his office and everything gets burned or shredded. I got to assume. Or is there someone responsible for categorize? I don't know how that would work.
You definitely have somebody there for records retention. I mean, that's part of.
But theoretically, he should have been
the archives. It's part of the requirements for the executive branch.
But
they probably don't let you actually leave until somebody has actually checked. At least they shouldn't. I
mean, I got to assume in a normal situation, he would have been sending that shit down to records on a regular basis, or burning or shredding or whatever. There's no way having that office after however many years is allowed. There's just no way.
Then again, it was 1991, and if you read Legacy of Ashes or the follow-up book, CIA is comprised of a lot of cowboys that the rules don't apply.
Sure, so they are human.
And not just human, but again, to go back to a point that I made earlier, it's a group of people that have been taught how to bend or break the rules. How do you punish that and maintain a culture of people that are bending and breaking the rules effectively?
Well,
And Robert Redford is literally
he's literally Robert Redford.
The Not So Grand Jury is sponsored by Morwa P. LLC.
The opinions expressed in the Not So Grand Jury are those of the hosts themselves and not of their respective employers.
The theme music for the Not So Grand Jury is from Gustav Holst's Jupiter and is in the public domain.
If you'd like to get in touch with us, if you want to suggest future movies, or even if you want to offer corrections, you can email us at notsograndjury@gmail.com or message us on any of our social media accounts.
The Not So Grand Jury is copyright 2025, all rights reserved.